Welcome to the Real Chili Podcast.
And the Golden Eagles of Marquette University in Milwaukee are bound for the Final Four for only the third time ever.
5 seconds left. Marquette down by one, trying to avoid the upset. Blue the drive, the left hand. It's good. 1 second to play. Vander Blue has put Marquette in front by one.
And I want to win every day as basketball players, as students, and I want to win every day, most importantly, as people.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Real Chili Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Lavender, and for the first time ever in the history of the Real Chili Podcast, we've got not one, not two, not three, not four, but 5 bros on this episode of the Real Chili Podcast. Fellas, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Bros.
Thank you for that LeBron James type introduction, Mike. I believe it was the Fugees who widely said back in '96, I want to say.
Yeah, that's it.
Too many MCs, not enough mics. Well, the hell with that. More than enough mics for all 5 here. Welcome, everybody. Fire up Real Chili Pod.
Congratulations to you, Brian, who had a Fugees reference lined up.
You never know what you're going to get from me on a daily basis on these things. That just hit me about 10 seconds ago, so felt good.
Wyclef Brian.
So you may be wondering why we're recording on a Sunday night. Marquette has been off or will be off by the time they play in their next game for nearly a week. But we thought this was a perfect time to come to you because during this week, Marquette's got 6 games left in the regular Big East Conference season to wrap out this season. And with a victory that St. John's just had just a minute ago, Marquette is in the driver's seat now. St. John's had a 71-65 victory over Villanova at Madison Square Garden, putting Marquette in control of their own destiny. So we wanted to get on the pod, all 5 of us. We don't know how this is going to work. This could be chaotic. But we wanted to talk about the remaining 6 games and kind of set expectations for the remainder of Marquette's season. Because really, fellas, and Pete Worth, I want to throw this one to you. Really, if you go back and listen to our expectations pod for the beginning of the season, kind of the season preview, the reality that we're living in right now is kind of the highest end of what we thought was even possible. So it's impressive what Marquette's been able to do, but they've got to close out here down the stretch.
Well, first of all, thank you for considering me the point guard of this endeavor tonight, Michael. We did talk about that going in from the beginning of the year, that we thought this team was going to be good. We didn't know how good. And I think that we can all say definitively that this team has kind of surpassed our expectations. And that's mostly because everybody on our roster, I think, has improved. And you can only credit Steve Wojciechowski for that, and we can talk about that a little later. But the development of Theo John defensively and Marcus Howard kind of completing – he's still not limited by his size, obviously, but his offensive – being a maestro out there, his incredible offensive performances and his improvement in ball handling and passing too has led us to where we are right now, which is top 10 team and looking at least a 3 seed in the NCAA tournament.
So not only at least a 3 seed in the NCAA tournament, but Pete Mohan, we just mentioned it, with St. John's beating Villanova. Villanova is still technically at first in the Big East Conference standings at 11-2, but Marquette right there at 10-2. And this sets up a scenario where the 6 remaining games that Marquette has on the calendar, if we win out, we're going to win the Big East Conference regular season and maybe even vault ourselves as high as a 2 seed. Depends on what happens in the Big East tournament. But this is what we want. If you're a Marquette fan, this is what you want. Your destiny is in this team's hands.
Technically, we did control our destiny prior to Villanova's loss because we had the game on them. If we, had kept pace and beaten them, we still would have won the Big East outright. But this loss that they incurred at the hands of St. John's gives us that extra game cushion where now even if we stumble in one other game, we can beat Villanova and still take first place in the regular season. So Villanova's loss today doesn't change a whole lot. We still pretty much have to beat Villanova if we want to get that regular season title. So we're still on pace, and I think that what we said after the Villanova game was that we have to win these next 3, and we took care of business against DePaul, so we'll see how the Butler game goes.
The one thing I'll add off of that, well, obviously everything we're talking about team-wise, today, as we record this on Sunday, was a big day for the conference as a whole. St. John's and Seton Hall took big steps toward locking down fairly safe NCAA tournament bids. They got work in front of them, but both got, obviously Seton Hall, a win on the road, always huge. And then St. John's beat somebody else other than Marquette, so we can feel less bad about ourselves. But that's important just to getting this league to 4 bids, because it was coming into today, if those 2 teams lost, you could realistically say it was potentially a 2-bid league. So important from that standpoint, just for the conference.
Important for the conference, but Eric, thinking about the quality of this Marquette team, and everybody thinking about the quality of this Marquette team, and thinking about the fact that the Big East is going to struggle to get 4 teams in this year. We talked about it a little bit before. This is, one of the best Marquette teams of the past decade. I guess that remains to be fully realized, but they're going up against lesser competition. But I think through the course of the season, through some of the non-conference play, and through the defense primarily, we've come to the point where, maybe the Big East is a little bit down this year, but that's not necessarily a knock on Marquette.
Mike, that's exactly right. I think this team, if you look, I think you have to go all the way back to the 08-09 team for the best start to conference play by any Marquette squad to find better. And with 4 wins actually in a row, if we knock out our next 4, this team becomes the best Marquette basketball team to start conference play in history, which is really pretty cool. I think on the individual level, you're seeing some incredible performances. Marcus, I think it has to be said, has a firm grasp on the Big East Player of the Year trophy at this point. Preseason, the coaches didn't vote Marcus as the favorite to win that award. It was Shamori Pons. And while Pons has been incredible, and we've seen it in person twice, or up close anyway, Marcus has really done things that have just been stunning. He passes the eye test. He's carried us in big games. Sam Hauser, another one who, again, earning Big East Player of the Year honors, not probably in his sights, but Big East first team, maybe.
This is kind of where I want to throw it to everybody and get into a bit of a conversation here, because I think there are 2 paths that we can continue to go down for this team. I want to get a sense of where we all feel the ceiling for this team is going into the Big East tournament, going into March Madness, the NCAA tournament. What is the ceiling for this team? And then what we think the floor for this team is. Maybe that's not as much of a fun conversation. But Pete Mohan, I think the ceiling on this team, if you look at a player like Marcus, I mean, there's a lot of guys on this roster who can go off in different ways at any given point. And that, to me, spells out a team that could have tremendous success in March in the Big East tournament. But what do you think the ceiling for this team could be going forward, Pete?
Well, I think that you're right, Mike, and that the depth, is really a key part, and we've seen the development of multiple guys throughout the season. I think still, though, for me, the biggest difference is the defense. And I think it was Paint Touches who tweeted some data out on Marcus's progression defensively, and he's really, emerged as a pretty good on-the-ball defender. And, that's a key element to the improvement of our defense, because if the ball is getting stopped better on the perimeter, it allows a little more time for guys like Morrow and John to make that rotation and guard the rim. So just that incremental improvement on the perimeter and keeping guys out of the lane has, in effect, made our interior defense that much better. So I've really appreciated that development from the squad.
To answer the question, what is the ceiling and what is the floor, I think it's pretty simple. Ceiling's a second weekend NCAA tournament team, and it wouldn't be inconceivable to see him lose in the first game.
Hold on.
That's the ceiling?
Second weekend? That's it?
That's the floor.
You're telling me that this team is a Final Four caliber roster right now.
Jay Billis told us that earlier this week.
That's fine. Jay can see that. Jay doesn't watch every damn one of our games like the rest of us do. You're telling me right now all of you would go to a book and bet on this team to make – I'm not saying it's a slight. No. It's a fun team. We're excellent. I watched the top 6. No way. Not a snowball's chance in hell we're running through.
They're the number 10 team in the country.
That's good. You as well as anybody knows that rankings are completely arbitrary. Why is this turning into me shitting on our team?
Bubbles hates Marquette basketball. That's what it is.
All right. Everybody chill out.
We're not saying they're going to make the Final Four, but we were saying they can make the
Come with something a little more realistic.
Let me add some context.
They could win if Zion dies tomorrow, they could win the national title. Why the hell not? Not likely going to happen. You're asking what's the ceiling. I don't think making the second weekend is a massive accomplishment.
So that should be a floor.
If they are in Minneapolis at the Final Four, that is – I don't want to – not – it's what's a step below miraculous, highly improbable. I think the way this roster is currently put together, it would be amazing if they made the Final Four. And they're the top number 10 team in the country. It would be amazing if they made it.
So this is a classic mistake from a host perspective. I should have defined the terms that I was using. I think ceiling – in terms of this conversation means maybe it's a bit of a stretch, but it's not so far of a logical leap from what we've seen from this team that someone would call you fucking crazy for saying that. I don't think anyone's going to call you crazy or anybody crazy, Brian, for saying this team could make a Final Four.
Crazy any day.
If we're talking about a ceiling, we're talking about where would this team top out? What would they? Obviously, Brian, I think we'd all agree that they can't compete within a Final Four with those top 6 teams. That is a challenge. So from there, you get to the point where Elite Eight is a ceiling, right?
Right. And to go back to the scenario point, and Eric, I will agree with you. Yes, of course. People get upset around you. Could all of a sudden, right, you're in the Elite Eight, you're playing an 11 seed because chaos happens. Sure, like there's always a scenario where it could happen. You're just saying right now what's a logical, outcome. I think second weekend I think they're good enough, and I think that's a hell of a step to go from a team that wasn't good enough to get in a year ago to now saying we should be a second weekend team. We got the roster for it. I think that's a major positive and a great thing. I'm excited about it. It's just yes. I don't know. Now you guys got me running in circles. This was an ambush. Total BS. Unbelievable.
No, we don't need to make Brian feel bad, everyone. Things changed for me after the Butler game. Oh, that's at least my perspective.
Go on.
And I realized it as we were recording the pod after the Butler game that I was just so overwhelmed with how good our team was, how good they were playing, that I couldn't even come up with reasonable points to make. I was just that rattled by the performance, essentially. And I was like, okay, if I'm going to, give this team accurate analysis, I need to switch the lens on how we perceive how good they are. And from that point on, I've tried to examine their play, in the context that this is a top 10 team, hold them to that standard if you really want to notice the nuance in the improvements or mistakes that they're making on a game-by-game basis. And I think that, I was maybe a little rough on them, after the Villanova game, the win even, because they had some missed opportunities. I think that that's the appropriate way to judge this team because they are that good. I think that this team is capable of beating damn near everyone in the country, maybe not Duke, but everyone else, just because the defense has improved that much, because it gives Marcus Howard an opportunity to make a difference with his scoring. And if we play as well defensively as we did against Villanova in the win last week, we can beat just about anyone because we have the offense to go with it.
And I agree with that. When we talk about ceiling, floor, those are kind of arbitrary terms. But what we know for sure is that this team can win in a lot of different ways, and we've seen that. We can outshoot somebody like a Buffalo or a Creighton. We can win with our defense, like Seton Hall, like Villanova. We can win when both sides aren't clicking quite just well. We can win without our best player on the road at Georgetown, which I thought was the biggest game this season by a wide margin.
Agreed.
In terms of getting this team believing that they can go far. So when we talk about how far can this team go, I honestly think they could make a Final Four. But like Brian said, who knows what's going to happen in the tournament? All we know is it feels damn good to be like a top 10 team. Even with Jay Billis, saying that's fine. I don't take his words too seriously when he says that the Wisconsin Badgers play the right kind of basketball. So, but we'll see.
I want to go back. I want to be a little bit fair to Bubbles, assuming he meant go deep into the second weekend and not just make the second weekend as the ceiling. I think that's a distinction that needs to be made. Looking at it and looking at some brackets that were released this week, one by Sports Illustrated, this is what the path actually would look like for us in this hypothetical scenario. It would be a game against Texas State to kick things off. In this, we're a 3 seed. We're in their East region. It'd be a game against Texas State. Then, and I think we can talk about this. I wanted to talk about this a little bit later, but game against Virginia Tech after that, which I think pretty sure the committee would do everything possible to get that to happen if it can happen. Then a game against Michigan. So we're again now into the second weekend, and then potentially a game headed up against Duke to get into the Final Four. I mean, if you're telling me that beating Texas State and Virginia Tech is our ceiling to get to the second weekend, I'm calling crap. Like that should be what we view as sort of middle of the road, and our floor being, a win in the first round, playing a second round game.
Okay, but upset. I will say also our seed, we're not like saying right now we're guaranteed like a 3 seed or some shit. I mean, we lose one or two other games, and we lose to Villanova. We lose our first or second game in the Big East tournament. And with how the Big East is perceived with less teams making it, we could end up with a 6 or 7 seed easily, end up facing a Duke or Virginia in the second game, and, we're gone. We're not even in the second weekend. It could happen so easily.
Oh, let the realistic negativity flow through you, Peter.
But you really think
you better listen.
We have 6 games left. That's it. I mean, you really think we're going to lose like 3 or 4 of those, including like first game in the Big East tournament?
Not planning on it, but it wouldn't be completely improbable if they went 3-3. Seton, obviously, Villanova is going to be a very tall order. Seton Hall is going to be playing for their lives. We come through that. I mean, not impossible.
Just think about, okay, let's say we go 4-2 and then 1-1 in the Big East tournament. That's 5-3 over the next 8 games. That's not necessarily, the hottest team going in at March. I think that we probably would not be a 3 or a 4 seed if we go 5-3 down the stretch.
I just don't think at this point, barring a total collapse, I just don't think that we could get any lower than, say, a 6, in my opinion. Because we're basically guaranteed to get second place in Big East.
I'm with Neighbor on this. I just think it's pretty unthinkable that with the remaining schedule, what we're looking at, to lose enough games, and just considering the momentum we've even picked up and just how we seem to be humming right now as a group, it seems somewhat unthinkable that we would lose so many games as to be ranked in the mid-20s or unranked towards, Big East play. It just doesn't – I don't see it potentially happening. I could see, I guess, a big upset in the Big East tournament leading to a drop in the ranking, but I don't know. I don't see it.
I just want to say also, too, if we're going to talk about the nuance in the top end of where we could possibly go, we kind of have to talk about what our luck would be in terms of basically the top 2 teams in each region. So, you never know. Like, it could end up being beneficial. Maybe we fall down to a 5 or 6 seed and we're out west, but we avoid Duke, or we avoid maybe another team that we have a bad matchup against. So I think that when you talk about really what is the ceiling, it's kind of also who's all in your region.
The impressive thing to get myself back on some because somehow I've turned into the freaking anti-hero of this podcast.
That's nothing new, Brian.
No, I've stepped in it today. My thing is, there's probably only a dozen to 15 teams that would be favored over us right now. I know we're ranked 10th, but there are good teams that are behind us that I think we don't match up great against.
Ken Palm has us at 25, so that stands to reason. 26.
There you go. That's so maybe 20, depending on how they match up. I agree with the sentiment. I forget who said it earlier, but obviously we're guarding better than we ever have before. We have a cheat code offensively who has the ability to blow up an opposing game plan. But there's holes that come with that too, right? We're very ball dominant with one guy. We've seen St. John's completely take us out of our game with their length. They're not the only team in the country with length. You're going to presumably run into that. That's what makes it fun. Wojo, to look big picture, like we have, this is the best team he's assembled, just pure roster-rise with different people at different positions. They've given themselves a shot. To your original point, Mike, yes, they have a shot at the Big East Championship. That's freaking incredible, right? Again, this has not been I know we made the tournament 2 years ago. This hasn't been a program that's really been in any level of relevance since 2013. This is the first time that we're kind of in the crosshairs of people paying attention and being a threat, and it's out there. And that's exciting, and that's great, and that they should all be commended for that. How it plays out, I guess I'll put it this way. I'll end it with this as I'm zigzagging all over the place. If they got upset on the first weekend, I wouldn't lose my mind. Like, it'd be disappointing, but it's still a great year, and they lost one game, and it sucks. But basketball's crappy, and somebody can hit 1,000,000 threes in a game, and you get beat. Like, I don't.
Well, so isn't that what you would define as a floor then?
I don't think it's this. Well, when we say
I don't really want to talk about ceilings nor floors anymore.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
I want to talk about walls and doors.
Yeah, let's talk about walls.
The walls are in, man.
Breaking down doors and walls.
All right, so
I have a question though. I have a question for the bros. All right, in which situation would you rather get a win against Villanova? The upcoming one at Nova, or in the Big East tournament to win the Big East tournament?
undoubtedly for me the win in the Big East tournament, because I think that can still affect your seeding. I would rather have that victory on that stage over them, a passing of the torch, if you will. That'd be my answer.
I've always personally valued regular season conference titles over the league tournament title. That's just me. There's no hard empirical evidence for that. That's just always been my thing, to show how good you are over a long period of time like that. So if beating them meant winning the regular season conference title, I'd take that.
But you've also never felt one, what that feels like, Brian.
A Big East tournament title? That's fair.
So, I would take the Big East tournament title just because the committee looks at that. The committee always judges that probably too highly. You know, if your team goes on a run in the Big East tournament or your conference tournament and ends up winning, then I feel like that gives you kind of a boost that you don't necessarily deserve. So I would take that, because I would think if we do win the Big East tournament, we're looking at least a 3.
Also, I think that's probably the best optics for Wojo in the program, him lifting a trophy center court of MSG, after,
exactly.
NIT and no postseason before that, like, to be holding that trophy at MSG, regardless of the NCAA tournament. That's huge.
Is there a chance that, depending on how dominant we do look, and this assumes a victory and Wojo holding the trophy at MSG, is there a chance that we're propelled to a 2 seed at that point, or is that completely out of reach?
I think that's perfectly within reason.
It depends on what other teams do. I mean,
Sure.
If you told me right now that we ended the year on what would that be, a 9-game win streak if we won out in the conference tournament? I mean, what does that put our final record at? What are we at right now? I don't even remember off the top of my head.
It'd be 30-4.
30-4. That sounds like a 2 seed.
Yeah, I mean, just to give you a sense right now, the 2 seeds in order from top to bottom: Kentucky, Michigan State, Michigan, and North Carolina. So that's some heady competition. We would have to leap over Houston and Kansas, who are also 3 seeds right now. According to Bracket Matrix at time of recording, Marquette is the 3rd 3 seed.
And Michigan State lost to Illinois, so I don't see them having any future success this year.
Well, and Michigan State Nick Ward just broke his hand this afternoon.
Did he really?
Yeah, so they're in trouble.
All right, folks. So I have one last question for the group here, and we're going to wrap it up, and then maybe there'll be a brief junk drawer segment. But here's my question for you. For all the fans out there, for all the fans who are listening into this podcast and want a reason to hope for a Marquette run in the Big East tournament or in the NCAA tournament. Obviously, we're not there yet. We've still got to get through the remaining 6 games in the regular season. But, Brian, I'm going to throw it to you first. What does each of you think is the key for this Marquette team to continue its success or to amplify its success? It can be an individual player stepping up their game or continuing their game. It can be defense improving. What is your key for this Marquette team to continue to maintain the quality of its play and even improve the quality of its play for the remainder of the season?
I think that's easy, and I think it's been a big reason why they've won their last couple games. The emergence of Sakar and Im as a very real third scorer as opposed to just freshman Joey Hauser. Sakar has confidently shot the ball. He's got to the basket. His percentage is high. That it's, they don't win the last 2 games. I know DePaul they ran away from, but they don't comfortably beat DePaul and get a squeaker of a win against Nova without what he did. He continues doing that. They're in great shape.
Pete Worth, to you, what do you think?
Well, Brian stole a very good one right off the bat there, but
you can take the same one.
No, I don't want to take the same one since there's so many different options here. I honestly think that's 2 things. It's Marcus and Sam continuing their aggressive play. Marcus has been obviously incredible. He makes 36-point games look boring. And not only that, but the contributions from, like Brian said, Sakar continuing to be that kind of 3rd or 4th option. And even Brendan Bailey giving us a spark off the bench defensively, and Theo John and Ed Morrow staying out of foul trouble. I mean, our center depth is great. When Matt Helt is your 3rd best center, along with your sexiest player, then you're in good shape. So I just think that the 2 guys, the stars being stars, and the depth providing what they have been doing all year.
Eric, I'm going to throw it to you next, and then to Pete Mohan after that.
Health.
Whoa.
Health.
Oh, health. This team's got to stay healthy. I mean, that is we've been incredibly lucky this year in terms of player health. We need to stay healthy. We need to stay focused. I guess I'll put focus with health. There's a lot of media exposure now. There's a lot of interviews happening with national media, with Marcus going on, like Jim Rome today, things like that. Let's stay focused. Let's stay healthy. And I think that's key.
I'm really impressed with the continued improvement of the team 3-point shooting. I think when we, did the little Big East preview pod with who were we with? We did the Big East preview pod with paint touches. Is that correct?
I think so. Yeah,
when we did
when
we did the Big East preview pod with paint touches, I think that we were as a team somewhere around the 34-35% range shooting from 3, and now we're up to almost 40% as a team, 39.6 for 7th in the country. So that means that our offensive game planning has been excellent in putting our best shooters in position to get those shots in volume, and we're starting to convert. And I think continue to go with that game plan, work that perimeter, because we're as good as anyone shooting from out there.
My quick answer before we get to the junk drawer segment, so anybody with junk drawer items, get ready. But my quick answer about what the most important thing for this team needs to continue to be, in 2 words, Theo John. I think Theo John, seconded by Ed Morrow, has completely changed not only the play of this team, but the mentality of this team. It cannot be overstated what his defensive presence brings, not only in the fact that he can cover up our defensive mistakes, which, by the way, still happen pretty frequently, but the mentality he brings, staring guys down as they fall to the ground after he's just thrown their ball into the second row, that's little, but that is huge for a team to have that killer mentality and that bravado. You don't need to get technicals, don't need to get too crafty with it. That's key for me. So Theo John, defense. All right, so I don't know if we have folks ready for a junk drawer segment. Eric, I'm going to throw it to you just in case you have any junk drawer items. If not, we'll see if anybody else does.
I'm always ready for the junk drawer, Mike. Thank you very much.
Nice.
Kick it off. Tomorrow is President's Day, everybody. So big shout out to our president, Dr. Michael R. Lovell, the 24th president of the great university, Marquette University. That's just what I want to kick it off with.
I thought you were going to talk about.
Don't know if you guys have any other favorite presidents you want to mention in your lives or in the history books.
My dad is the president of the Illinois Green Industry Association, so shout out to him. Shout out to Steve Worth.
Papa Worth, President Worth. Okay.
I like to call myself the Don Jr. of the nursery business in Illinois. It's amazing.
I'd be remiss if I didn't shout out Abraham Lincoln just because he's the best president that ever lived and is my personal hero, one of my personal heroes.
My early favorite for the next president of the United States, Amy Klobuchar.
There you go.
Good Minnesotan, Midwesterner, Bubbles.
I'd like to start my first ever junk drawer segment by acknowledging the good Dr. Mike Lavender and Eric Pond for creating, I think, a national sensation. People everywhere on Twitter and social media have been clamoring for the junk drawer.
It's all we've been hearing. It's all the social media team has been telling me.
I've thought long and hard, and I had something. However, last night something was presented to me that could be no more perfect. I'm going to shout out one of the biggest Marquette basketball fans out there. A couple of you may recognize. He was a year under us at Marquette. Colin Bowe lives here in Detroit with me. I'm with him last night. He flew in for the Villanova game last week or a week and a half ago, whenever that was now, and he showed me a video after a little fiesta on the flight, couple cocktails put back, befriended one of the flight attendants, and when they landed, he was allowed to give a Go Marquette Happy National Marquette Day announcement over the plane. Shout out to you, Colin Bowe. Well done. Way to get the people fired up and give them what they want. That's my junk drawer.
Colin, the only thing more impressive than that is the fact that you were able to get through this entire podcast listening to it to get to that point. So congratulations.
God love you.
Two different counts. All right, Eric, back to you. Anything else?
Just one more thing. Since he's been sort of putting us in a casket all year long, want to both the men's and the women's team. This is really spurned by, unfortunately, the women's loss to St. John's this week. I think it's time we study a little on the Saint himself, John. So we're going to take a minute and learn about him just in case another matchup happens in the Big East tournament. So audience, this is sort of the prep work that I feel we need to do as a Marquette community that we haven't done yet to overcome the St. John's team. So John was canonized by Pope Alexander VIII on October 16th, 1690. He happens to be the patron saint of hospitals, the sick, nurses, firefighters, alcoholics, and booksellers. So I feel like we need to take that information, really harness that shit, and figure out how to take down the St. John's team that's tortured both the men's and women's programs this year.
Pray to St. John, Greg Elliott, please.
If St. John is the patron saint of firefighters, nurses, and alcoholics, I feel like that's like 75% of the Milwaukee population. So we got to be able to.
That's kind of what I'm saying here.
Right there. Yeah, I mean, that's got to work for us eventually.
Also, with the news of Amazon not electing to go to Queens, get a job.
All right, folks, that is going to do it for.
Wait. I have a junk drawer thing.
And I have a junk drawer, too.
All right, hurry up. Let's go.
So I'm going to talk about literal junk, which is the Wintrust Arena basketball experience. I was unfortunate enough, I guess, to attend that Marquette DePaul game last week. And that college basketball experience was hilarious. From the concession stands not knowing how to operate the credit card machine, giving me 2 hot dogs when I only ordered 1 and some fries, from the halftime entertainment, which was just DePaul students scooting around on rugs. And also, like, they had a tug of war, which one team clearly won and was, like, backing all the way into the band practically. And the girl didn't even call it. She was, like, counting down on a timer, even though this big guy was, like, still pulling these 8 kids like basically across the court. That was hilarious. There was nobody in the stands in terms of students for DePaul outside of the band.
It looked like you were the only one there.
Just one of them. Yeah, the Demon deck was jam-packed with about, 7 passionate DePaul fans. So overall, hilarious experience, and I'm glad we kicked the shit out of them.
All right. I have to say, I might have said it to you guys before in text chats, but I believe that Joey Hauser's nickname needs to be Scotty Chitwood or Joey Chitwood because I think he really is like the Jimmy Chitwood of Wisconsin. And in honor of, playing Butler coming up again, Joey's first game against Butler, he didn't really have a great game, 1 for 5 from the field with 3 turnovers. And he's kind of been on a bit of a mini slump himself recently. So hopefully, he can live up to his new nickname of Scotty Chitwood and have a huge game. And also, I have this for you guys.
Scotty!
I have this for you guys.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you cut it off. Oh,
Crank that up.
All right. Well, that was good while it lasted for those 10 seconds or so. But, folks, that's going to do it for us here today on the Real Chili Podcast, one of the more chaotic podcasts in recent memory. I don't think we've never done a 5-person podcast before, so thank you for bearing with us. Going to be a fun remainder of the season here, no matter your definition of a ceiling or a floor. 6 games left here in the Big East regular season for Marquette. Their next game is coming up this Wednesday. They will get back on the court against Butler. It is a home game, Wednesday, February 20th, 9 p.m. Eastern on CBS Sports Network. Fellas, thanks again for joining me on this pod.
Bring it out, baby.
Oh, let the dulcet tones of Pacific Life take us out.
Tail slap.
All right. Signing off for Brian Henry. Signing off
Tail
for
slap.
Signing off for Eric Pond and signing off for Pete Worth. I'm your host, Mike Lavender. Shouts to everybody that responded to our question last time, and shouts to the real junk drawer inspiration, Luke Junk. We'll talk to you next time here on the Real Chili Podcast.